selling to someone on the promise that you think your product is going to be good to them is just not the same thing as selling to them with the evidence that it's been good for someone else. If you're not willing to use your own product and like figure out why it's not working, if it's not, then you're just kidding yourself about it ever working for anyone else.
What's up, builders? My name's Bobby.
And I'm Renier, and this is How Would You Build It, a podcast where we interview South African startup founders, business builders, and tech innovators.
And if you like our content, make sure to hit that subscribe, follow us for more, and we'll make sure to bring you the best interviews, unique insights to help you build better and stay ahead. Enjoy the show. Welcome everybody to another episode of How Would You Build It? Very excited for another episode, and this time we've got a community member from the Founder Collab. Very excited to hear some stories and get the conversation going around growth. But as always, first and foremost, Renier, goedemiddag. How are you doing today?
How's it, Bobby? Yeah, lekker, man. A bit cold in Stellenbosch, but we push on.
Yeah, it's not winter is coming, it's winter is here. That is like official now.
It has arrived.
It has arrived. And then to introduce our guest for today is Geoff Forbes. He's the head of growth at Zuzo. Geoff, thanks for joining.
Yeah, super stoked to be here. Thanks for having me. Brilliant.
Is it as cold where you are as we are suffering here?
It's there or thereabouts, but I've got a fire of passionate entrepreneurial energy burning inside me at all times. So.
Let's go.
That's exactly what we want to hear. That's exactly it. Okay, awesome. So Geoff, I think to set the scene for today's conversation. So obviously, you're a member, you're a founding member of the Founder Collab. You're part of the the early stage, and you guys are building something quite, I wouldn't say unique, but it's something new in South Africa. Being able to give your employees sort of recognition within a tool within your Teams or Slack. It's a very cool concept. I've done it before, but I think the main thing that I want to kind of touch into is that building something is difficult on its own. People seem to forget the second phase of that, which is actually getting it distributed and getting it to the market. And I thought we could sort of dive into how you've been doing it as a head of growth at multiple companies to just kind of give us your sort of raw feedback on what it's like getting those feedback loops as you're distributing to the market. So maybe just give us, I might have butchered the introduction, but just tell us about Zuzo and how long you guys have been around and what you're trying to achieve.
Okay. Well, yeah, I should disclaim that the only growth that I've done successfully without any reservation is growth of my own skeleton up to this point in my life, because I've done that quite well. Renier can attest to the fact
you've done it once.
I've done it once. I can do it again. But yeah, I managed to make myself tall. The rest of it beyond that is to be taken with a pinch of salt. But to start with Zuzo, as you said, it's a tool that helps companies build a culture of kind of more regular, habitual appreciation in among the team, where colleagues drive praise for each other, and that in turn drives rewards onto an app that you can spend on a whole universe of good delights out in the world. And yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it's about like the fact that work and life is better when you are valued for what you're doing, and the people who are best positioned to value you authentically are the people working alongside you. And so it's all about saying, here's a bit of budget to make that manifest in your team communication, the place you're already working together. And that's Zuzo. And like you say, there's a host of comparable products out there, a lot of them international, but actually it's not something that's very well done in South Africa in particular. So we're trying to change that.
Hey founders, building a startup can be quite lonely. You've got a big vision, no playbook, and let's be honest, your friends don't really get what you're trying to do. But that's where the Founder Collab comes in. It's a private community for early stage founders in South Africa, a space to connect, ask questions, share wins, and get unstuck faster. Whether you're pre-product, post-revenue, or pivoting like a pro, there's someone in the collab who has done it before and ready to help. The best part, it's action-orientated. No fluff, just weekly meetups, intros that matter, and the kind of support you cannot Google. So if you're tired of building alone, come and build with us at the Founder Collab. Check out www.thefoundercollab.com. That's www.thefoundercollab.com. Let's build together.
When you try and sell it, when you try and speak to, you know, HR departments or whoever it is that's kind of in control of it, how do they generally understand the concept? Is it easy to sell? Is it something that they kind of recognize? And then second part of the question, are they happy? Because they have to budget for it, right? So it's kind of like, we're a part of HR. Do we have budget for it so that we can pass it on? So what does that conversation look like when trying to sort of, again, distribute?
Yeah. I mean, it's been woefully difficult to sell it, to be completely honest. The challenge begins in exactly the step you allude to, which is that it's not a real familiar exercise to like have a tool that helps do this. And most companies will have some form of like, you know, once a quarter at the end of the year, we'll do an employee award, or a lot of people do have some sort of like peer feedback mechanism where you can submit it to your manager and they'll in turn resubmit it to theirs. And then like, we'll see if the board approves it at the end of the day. But that's probably the most surefire way of killing whatever semblance of true appreciation there was once in someone's mind. So anyways, the sale's tricky, and you know, something we were chatting about before is this idea of like products that are vitamins versus products that are painkillers. And Zuzo, as worthwhile a thing it is to build, which is why I'm you know, feverishly at it. It's definitely a vitamin product. It's the sort of thing that like you have to be in a pretty healthy state of mind with like a lot of your life-threatening kind of needs being met already in order to be in a position to be interested in like investing in the fish oil tablets that will kind of incrementally help you. Probably a more charitable. Yeah.
But Geoff, isn't that just a positioning thing, right? I mean, you can position a vitamin as a painkiller.
You totally can. I think like the analogy I was about to make, which is actually a better one for my sake, is sleep, right? Like the whole thing of like get 8 hours sleep, you can get away with it for months and months and months on end, but it's costing you every day and you're not showing up to your full capacity. And actually, you know, if you shift your perspective on it, getting that 8 hours of sleep can be the most vital, important thing you do to begin each day, even though it's something you can get away without. And that is the way I genuinely feel about recognition and like making sure the people on your team feel like their work is worthwhile, you know? But getting that perspective shift is a bit of a difficult thing, especially if it comes back to saying, well, we got to pay for it, we got to justify it, we got to like substantiate some ROI. But even then, there's like there's hoops you can jump through and like equations you can write out to point at what the impact is going to be. But I think ultimately someone has to come into it with some sense of belief that this is a worthwhile thing of doing, you know. And so to circle all the way back to your question, Bobby, the sales convos I have go very quickly one way or another, which is that I see that I'm climbing a massive mountain and having to sell the idea of doing recognition first and then subsequently sell Zuzo as a follow-on, or they come in having already summited that first hill and me just having to say Zuzo's a good way of doing this, which it is. So that is an easy one once they're there. But yeah, it's on balance a challenge nevertheless.
And are you finding, because I would imagine, I remember when I was using, I won't use the term now, I won't use the competitor's name, but when we were using a similar product, it definitely helped with the remote side of life, right? Do you find that it's a good product for companies that are potentially in a remote or hybrid, or does it matter? Does it matter? Are you finding companies that are co-located also able to utilize this tool to give the recognition? Because, I mean, it's the same concept, right?
Yeah, we thought remote would be a big selling point going into it. I still think that logic is there, but in practice, we've actually not seen it skew very far in favor of remote teams. Most of our clients are hybrid, but I think that's just because like a lot of teams are hybrid. It's not a causal thing. So yeah, it's helpful to remote teams, and remote teams are going to tend to be a bit sort of more active in their Slacks and their MS Teams chats, which does somewhat kind of help the visibility of Zuzo because it exists fully within that environment. But it's not a huge difference maker.
So as
Yeah.
a person that's been doing growth for a long time, something that I always think about, right? So coming from a product management point of view, we always want to build stuff. Building stuff is the fun part, the hard part, but it's the fun part. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if no one's actually utilizing the thing, right? And so, having that outcomes mindset, you kind of want to make sure that what you're building is some form of a painkiller. It's solving someone's problem. Now, one of the things that I've noticed a lot in my experience in all the companies that I've been exposed to is that metrics and data is always an afterthought. It's always like the tech first, the kind of build first, and then let's go figure out if it's working or not. And then it's like, okay, but where do we go find this out? So from your perspective, when going down the growth route, what kind of metrics are you kind of trying to set in place when going and starting a tactic or strategy? Like what are you looking for? What kind of numbers are you looking for specifically, maybe in a Zuzo sort of reference?
It's funnily enough, for the most part, when I'm setting out, I'm not looking for numbers. I totally agree that growth can be a bit of an afterthought, and this is why I've especially enjoyed the role description of growth over the last few years, because it's this like beautifully badly defined thing and affords you the freedom to essentially work on whatever feels like, the most important lever or two to be focused on. Because it's like this inherent thing of making anything work is the fact that it grows to some extent, right? So it's indivisible from product, it's indivisible from marketing, it's indivisible from you can't separate it from really anything that the business does, which gives me a good excuse to involve myself and keep myself interested. But yeah, when you're at like the 0 to 1 phase, I actually tend to also allow metrics to be an afterthought, because you're in that like tropish phase of just doing things that don't necessarily scale, and like getting your first customer. There's not a metric that's going to help you do that. You just got to go get the first customer, and the exercise every time you set out to do it again with a new product or a new team is this this one-of-one challenge that you have to apply yourself to figure out really what the answer is to this puzzle. There's not a framework or a tactic or a playbook that can get you there. And then I sort of like roll it from that point on. So you got that first one, and now let's figure out, invent, experiment our way towards like what does the next 2 or 3 look like. And as you build momentum, you obviously start becoming a bit more formulaic and intentional and understand what's working, and then you can know what to measure and what to try and reinforce. But really, like even where Zuzo is right now, which is not that far into this journey, I'm still not too fussed about a lot of measuring.
Interesting.
And I think, Geoff, that makes sense, right? Because I mean, what's the point in trying to get to a certain amount of CAC if you don't even know if someone's even going to buy, right? So you wanna figure out step one: does someone actually want to buy this, all right? And that's obviously very important validation early on. A lot of people think, oh, I'm going to give it to someone for free. No, you have to convince them to pay, because if they don't pay, they're not going to apply the same amount of effort into making sure they get value from whatever they're paying for. And then if they don't pay, they're not going to use it. They're not going to give you feedback. It's a waste of time. If they pay, it doesn't work. They're going to phone Geoff and go, Geoff, this thing doesn't work. It's a piece of crap. And that's good feedback, because now Geoff can go and fix it and iterate and make it better. So you actually want someone to pay by any means possible. Get the first person to pay, because they'll give you feedback.
Yeah.
Okay? They'll give you feedback on your pitch, feedback on your product, and you'll learn things you can't even describe to someone else, but you'll learn something. And you go pitch the second one, and then you, without even knowing it, you're iterating in your mind.
Yeah.
But there's something that happens, Geoff, that I want to ask you about. Like, how do you counter when you build a startup, let's say, it takes 3 years for most people to get any kind of significant traction, to get to the kind of metrics where you actually can now measure and say, hey, I think we've got a business, right? So let's say it takes 3 years. But during that 3 years, one would have tried a lot of different things, and in many cases, you would have tried everything there is to try. But in the early days, things worked for different reasons to why they might or might not work later on. How do you keep your mind open to go, I tried that thing. We actually spent a lot of money. I wasted a lot of time. It didn't work. But now, 2 years later, you maybe have to try the same thing, but now with a bit better product, a bit more learnings. Like, do you revisit old ideas, or how do you prevent yourself from not trying things simply because they failed in the past?
Yeah, well, I'm not too proud to just try something again and just hope it'll work, even without changing too much. So it's not that much of a challenge personally, especially if I've exhausted all other measures. Hey, cycle back to plan A again. But yeah, I mean, in our case, we do anticipate it taking a few years. Unfortunately for Zuzo, we are kind of housed in this beautifully supportive environment that is Yo-Yo, this bigger company, and so the pressure is off in a way that it isn't for a lot of early stage builders. But it's also very much on because there's an expectation, like you're being well supported. There's every hope that you'll make something of this. But specifically, there are things that we tried earlier on that I'm now again trying. I think you cannot understate, especially with SaaS, B2B SaaS in particular, how valuable it is to have customers for the sake of selling, right? Like selling to someone on the promise that you think your product is going to be good to them is just not the same thing as selling to them with the evidence that it's been good for someone else, right? And so we are just now hitting this phase of our adolescence where we've got enough, traction and proof in the bank that we can say to people with conviction, there's something here, it's worked for people like you, it's working, and it'll work for you, or at least we can try it out, and there's good reason to think so. And a big part of that is just I think honestly personal incentives and like risk. If you're a head of people or kind of COO or anyone who's going to make the decision internally, you ultimately having to put your neck on the line to some extent to fight for like some budget to do some new thing. No. And especially with a product like Zuzo, which is very people focused, people centric, you're gonna get everyone on your team to do this new thing. And the fear, I think, that is well substantiated in HR is that like the new people initiative is lame or contrived or silly, and like the people team's going to have to follow up with people every week with an email reminding them to go do their like nomination. And people have been burned. And so, all to say, you're really asking people to take a leap to take your product on, and to ask them to do that without a real sense of assurance that it's going to be okay is a big ask. And so now we are asking the same people in the same ways that we were a year and a half ago, with more success this time around, because we managed to like really trudge our way through that valley of difficulty. And so yeah, it's a world apart. And there's some things I'm excited to try again, because I really feel like there was something to them the first time we tried, but then they failed. And I think maybe because of everything I've just said.
But such an important thing for founders to consider, that as you get a new customer and you iterate a few times, like going back to that original customer with just the updated pitch, now actually has a big chance of success. But often we park that customer and go, oh, they're not interested, but the timing was just off. So that's a very good reminder.
So what's interesting for me is I was working in a company recently, and so again, coming from a product perspective, new feature gets launched, new feature gets built, new feature, and the infamous go to market words come out, right? We need to go to market. And what they tried to instill, which I did not like, was like a set formula. Like imagine like a project plan, like new feature goes out, you will do point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you'll do it in this order. And I was just like, no, like you
Yeah.
can't do that. Like you've got to understand what it is. You've got to understand who's it for. You got to like do a bit of like research before you just say, okay, cool, we're going to go and speak to this customer or that person or whatever. Kind of understand what you're building and then go and figure out that plan to go ahead. It's not something you can just literally formulate from the beginning and say, okay, every time we want to launch something or we want to reach out to somebody, you're going to follow those. There might be some lessons and some sort of foundation stuff that you can do, but it's never the same. It never feels like it's the same. It's not like you can just pump an email every time you got a new feature and expect people are going to read that email and then adopt your thing, right? I just don't know if you've got some sort of experience in understanding that kind of fluidity of like growing and launching new things.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for some reason I'm thinking of, I don't know if you ever played any like car racing games growing up or more recently
Need for
perhaps,
Speed,
but
baby.
Need for Speed or like especially any of the F1 ones. This was a particularly prominent phenomenon where you're on the track and you're veering off left and then you sort of turn right and then you way overcorrect and you smash into the right hand side of the track and slowly the corrections become like slightly narrower and slightly tighter and you start actually being able to follow the contour of the path in front of you. And that sort of phenomenon is what comes to mind, Bobby, as you explain this like stage of taking something out there and figuring it out. Is like you're gonna not know or have the capacity to make the correct corrections the first several times, but it's gonna get a bit better each time. And look, I think you do have to go out with some sort of hypothesis, right? Some sort of idea of what you're trying. It's not to say you just like build a thing and then, I don't know, like write a LinkedIn post and see what happens. And like you have a plan and you have a strategy, and that needs to be, as I alluded to previously, it needs to be completely singularly specific to your scenario. And like there's so much context that goes into what a product is, who's going to be using it, what it's for, the whole circumstance of its existence, that you can't have a pre-written playbook that's going to work, like because so much of the data that needs to go into figuring out how to take this further only exists on the other side of trying. And so the only semblance of like framework that I have from having done this is to formulate hypotheses around what to experiment with, what channels to try, what types of people to reach out to, and have those be based on the best available information at the outset, but then try and get through that as aggressively as you can so that you have feedback that begins to kick into what you then continue to do. And the world's your oyster as far as what you experiment with and play around with, and it's often like one of the most fun like phases of a business is to be in that space. And
it's interesting. Like I agree, the FAFO, you try things out and you see if it works or not, right? And I remember the amount of times in companies where we would say things like, we've tried this, it didn't work. And then I'm just wondering, like, how does one in your position sort of make sure that the lessons you've learned in each sort of campaign or strategy is then relayed to the company, or it's documented somewhere, or like I know I've got scar tissue. I don't feel like I need to document it and write it down somewhere, but I wonder if that's actually something we need to do, is to actually sit back and say, I tried this. This is how it went, and don't do it again, or something like that, right? It kind of speaks. I don't know if you've read Ray Dalio's Principles books, where he talks about creating that sort of habit of doing that, so that you kind of always have something, you actually sit down and think about what's worked and what's not worked. I'm just wondering about how do you keep that continuity going and say, cool, this is what we did here. Let's not do that again, or this really did well, let's try that again. Like, how do we create that continuity in what we're doing and building and growing?
Yeah, this is something I really wish I was better at, or
Most
something I
people.
intend to become better at. Like, this sort of active reflection and I think the culture of postmortems with like development teams is such a healthy one. And there's a rigor around it in that context that there isn't in most other frames of reference. So this is one of the inherent advantages of being early stage, small team, etc., is that the cost of not doing this really rigorously is very small, because it can just live in my brain and in the brain, like sort of collective consciousness of a few people, in this like intangible, poorly defined space. And a lot of the value of the lessons is still there and accessible and meaningful. It's a totally different story, and I have next to no experience, what this looks like in a bigger team, when you're like a big company trying to launch a new product and it needs to be all well operationalized and whatever else. Like I can't for the life of me suggest what to do for that. But yeah, like for me, I just kind of know the stuff I've tried, and I have a sense of what's worked and why, and what hasn't and why not. And then when it comes to, considering reattempting something or trying something for the first time, that's sort of unconsciously all part of what goes into it. And unconsciously, like, not to completely rob us of any credit for being intentional about what we do. But as I say, the cost of not being really rigorous about it is quite small. So we can get away with it.
Geoff, so coming back to your point earlier around, like, making a promise to a client and then wanting to have the confidence that you will be able to deliver on that promise. I think what's fascinating is, like, if you look at someone like Steve Jobs, like, I mean, that guy just walked in, at Xerox. He saw what became a computer mouse, and they wanted to charge him $250. He just went out and told his engineers they need to make a similar one for less than $1, and they eventually pulled it off. And the lesson I take from that is, like, sometimes you need to back yourself and make a promise, which is a bit of a stretch, and then go deliver. But on the other hand, you also have a reputation that's at stake, and I mean, most people don't like lying or letting people down. How do you strike that balance? Because on the one hand, you can't grow without doing a bit of that, right? You can't grow by not making promises. You need to make promises, and you need to take leaps when you make those promises. But, like, how have you found that balance?
Yeah. That's a fun part of this. But I think another thing about the early stage is, like, if you do have 0 customers and you're making promises to potential customer 1, then assuming they become customer 1, you pretty much have no other priorities other than to deliver on those promises. So the kind of stakes are automatically made so high under that circumstance that, like, you got to figure it out. It's, I don't have kids, but I imagine it's like when you have kids and, like, you just have to pull your socks up and lock in, like, there's no more time to just screw around with whatever you were screwing around with before. Similarly, like, you've got client 1, you've got this baby that's now in your household, and it's going to die unless you like figure it out. Obviously, that needs to be paired with not being an idiot about the promises you make, and, like, to some extent grounding it in what's possible. I know there are people out there who sell, like, non-existent product, and I have a lot of respect for that, because that's, like, the ultimate follow the demand type play. In our case, we had built a lot more than that by the time we sold to our first client. And because we exist in this bigger company of Yo-Yo, we'd actually, like, become our own first client technically. So we had, like, a rep under the belt by the time we went externally. But even still, there were promises made, and one of the key things that I always wanted, and the team was always very aligned, that Zuzo would need to be very low maintenance, because to basically sell to an HR team the prospect of, improving the propensity to be recognized within your team, with the asterisk being that you have to continually encourage and reinforce that and try and make sure that it's happening. Like, they may as well not, like, what's the product doing then, So we were promising that Zuzo puts recognition on autopilot. That was like a phrase that we had at one stage. In fact, we said puts recognition on autopilot and on steroids. And so when we sold to our first customer, that was those were some of the promises we really were looking to fulfill, which was to say, whatever your level of ongoing sort of shout outs within your kudos Slack channel, like that's going to climb significantly. And whatever level of effort you had to put into that previously is going to drop. And the tricky thing about that is that it lives in their Slack channel. So we actually have very little direct influence on it. But we had built the product with that like really, really front and center in mind. And the ultimate proof in the pudding was that I think our second ever client, I'd been sort of nurturing this conversation for however long it had been. And then there was the interest to go live, but the head of people was going to be on leave for 3 weeks. And she said to me, let's do it when I get back. And I was like, no, we got to do it now. You know, we got to do it now.
The amount of time someone has said that, eh?
Yeah, I'm just, you know, for her, it's like, well, we should just leave it until I get back. And that was perfectly reasonable. But from where I was, there was this need and this urgency to get over the line. So eventually managed to twist her arm into launching it the afternoon that she went on leave. And that was like the ultimate proof of, can this work without someone there to baby it? Yeah, the autopilot thing. And she backed us, and like it's like a lot of, you know, we owe a lot to people who've taken those bets on us, and that's how it goes, I think, for most people. And it worked, and now that's something I can point to as like a point of proof for it fulfilling that autopilot promise. But yeah, I guess you make the promise, when it comes time to fulfill it, you hustle to do it. That's kind of the conclusion, I'd say.
Geoff, you spoke about dogfooding, which is startup slang for using your own product in your own organization. I think a lot of people are scared to do that because inevitably you probably get to a point where you go, people aren't using it, or not as much as we wanted to, or maybe it isn't currently as great as we thought it might be.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do you navigate that?
I mean, I'm like, in my personal capacity, just like avoiding problems is a big problem for me, and I avoid it very successfully. You could speak to any one of my like life coaches or past therapists about that, but that's what you're doing. If you're not willing to use your own product and like figure out why it's not working, if it's not, then you know you're just kidding yourself about it ever working for anyone else. Because there's never going to be a more forgiving environment to figure it out, right? And so, yeah, I don't know. I think you got problems if you're concerned about trying it out for yourself in the event that it doesn't work as well as you'd hope it would. Because
that's not a conscious thought, and I think that's why it's important to touch on it, because subconsciously people are just, we'll get to it, but it's actually probably the most important thing you can do. Because if it sucks, so what? It's probably going to suck for a client then as well. So then work on it until it doesn't suck or sucks less, and then you can
well, you need to
move forward. But I think it's a majorly underestimated thing.
Absolutely. You need to understand how it's going to add value to other people. If you're not kind of understanding the value yourself, how do you translate that to somebody else to say, this is how it's going to solve your problem? Otherwise, it just becomes a sales pitch. When you're dog fooding, you actually get to feel where the value is sitting, or where the value is not sitting yet. And then you can start actually relaying that to the people that you're trying to sell to, because you actually understand it better. I mean, it's
so let's just put Bobby on the spot. Bobby, are you using private property
every day? I'm a super user. Stellenbosch, I'm coming in.
Listen, I read my newsletter twice a week, and I'm like, damn, these guys are funny.
That's just narcissism, really. That's a different thing.
That's a different problem.
No, but seriously, as I think about it now, dog fooding was probably responsible for like the biggest and most significant pivot in our product sort of trajectory. We thought we were going to build a product which was an employee rewards card. And we thought the problem was people want to reward their employees, but they don't have a easy enough way of doing it because they buy gift vouchers and those limit people to spending them in a certain place, and they expire, and it's just a clunky experience. We can give you a virtual MasterCard. You can issue onto it. It can be slick, smooth, cheap, whatever. and then your employee can spend it wherever they want. That was like our V1 product. And in hindsight, that's like so lackluster and so valueless. But we really thought that was it. And it was in launching that to our team and saying like, here's a few $1,000 at Christmas, go enjoy it, that we realized that made it so concrete that there's actually, there's nothing to this. What do we actually like? What's going on here? There isn't really a product. And that led us to the realization that what we were getting at, the reason you want to reward people, the reason you want a gift card to be able to give them, is because you want them to feel that their work's being appreciated. And so it was that kind of like first principle that we uncovered in launching and dogfooding that V1, which led us to saying, hey, let's take this existing shout out Slack channel that we already have this like cadence built around, and let's try and amplify that by linking the rewards card to the activity in that channel, and productizing that so that we're really getting at driving the recognition as the root exercise, where the reward is the like deal sweetener at the end of it. So without dogfooding, like Zuzo would not exist as what it is whatsoever.
That's awesome.
And
it's funny actually on the card, Geoff. I mean, if I were to design something like that from the start, that's how I would think about it as well. Just make it convenient. But yeah, it makes sense. And I think the in an employee context, and I mean, Bobby, you mentioned remote workers. I actually think the opposite. Like if we're in the office together, you did something awesome, I give you a Vida voucher and go, let's go grab that coffee together.
Yeah,
you don't
I
have
like
to
that a
pay
lot,
because I just gave you a voucher.
Yeah.
It almost creates moments beyond just the recognition, which I think is a big driver, right, Geoff? I mean, if I can give you a Burger King voucher and we can now go to Burger King together, that's not only recognition, that's a social
community building,
totally
social engagement as well.
Totally, yeah. And that's for me personally, like my experience as an end user of Zuzo, as much as being on the other side of it, that's the most significant thing. Like when a colleague unexpectedly calls you out for something that you really just thought would have you're never expecting to get a pat on the back for it, and then it comes through and it's beautifully articulated and it really sort of shines the light on it, and then half your team goes and backs that with their own rewards, and now you've got like several $100 that you can spend on yourself, but you've also really had this intense like serotonin social burst. That's like what it's all about at the end of the day. And so that social connection building is a huge element, for sure.
Geoff, I've got a question. It might be a tricky one to answer, but sometimes when we think about these startups, we think about or the competition of the startup. We're building a startup, and then people, on the simplest level, you think competition is someone doing something similar, which in your case there are a few people that are doing that. But if you take it a step deeper, like what are you competing against? And if we not startups, other things that existed pre this idea, like what are you up against?
We're up against basically like DIY shout out channels. Most of our users up to this point are sort of startup scale up type companies, like 50 to 150 headcount, Cape Town based majority. And almost all of them had some sort of pre-existing like Slack channel or Microsoft Teams channel where they already encouraged people to give shout outs, and where there was already a healthy cadence of, a few people a week giving a few nice shout outs, and often some sort of rhythm around end of month, we reward the person who got like the shout out that got the most thumbs ups as a response, and often the feeling when you walk into a conversation where someone's got that sort of thing in place is that, we already have what your product does, we have, except for the automatic payout part, but that's not a big part of it. And ironically, the most successful customers that we've had, as far as the engagement is concerned, are the people who've had that pre-existing engagement around this sort of rhythm.
We've got a culture already.
Because exactly, it slots into this momentum and just adds a bit of fuel to the fire. And so I use that as part of trying to overcome that objection. But But yeah, at the end of the day, if everyone on the team, by whatever mechanism it is feeling super appreciated and super happy in their role and like stoked about life, then I don't think Zuzo like can improve. But I think there's often a real discrepancy between the extent to which you as a manager or an HR leader or a CEO think your team feel good about this sort of thing, and where they actually do feel the extent to which they actually do feel good about it. And so trying to highlight that gap is a big part of the exercise as well. Yeah.
If you can create a movement where people really understand how important recognition is, everybody would buy your product.
I mean, my product or something similar. If everyone understood it, there'd be more competitors though, wouldn't there? So I don't know how much I really want that.
There's a growth tactic for you, Geoff.
Yeah, just start a movement.
Yeah, just start a movement. You see, everybody's seen that video of the guy at the rave, right? Geoff, you that guy.
Yeah.
Dancing.
Yeah.
Now we're just waiting for Bobby to join you.
Yeah. No, but like this, Bobby, come dance, my brother.
No, listen, recognition 101. Let's do it. I'm in.
Come have a jam.
Yeah.
No, but like since
I think private property needs this. So
since we started, in the last few months, there's been like a direct South African competitor that started. And I don't know if they,
okay.
I do know that they knew about us before they started, because in fact, they like downloaded one of our ebook sort of lead magnet things off of our website at a suspicious moment. But ultimately, that honestly feels like a positive thing, because to your point, a growing pie, even if you have a smaller slice of it, is still a bigger slice at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think if we have more people championing this idea in South Africa of like, this is a worthwhile business activity, that'll be good for the employees, for the people, but it'll be good for our business too. So stoked. Let's have a dance.
So I actually want to take it back to one of the comments I made earlier, which is, you've got different types of sort of founders and builders out there, right? People that come from a technical background or a something else background, and growth and marketing and this side of the coin, they know very little about. What would you tell them as a starter? So someone joins the community and they're looking for some sort of pointers on how can they get their product to work or to grow, sorry. What kind of advice would you give to that person that's kind of fresh and trying to figure out the first steps?
I think the only sort of ubiquitously relevant advice is that there's nothing to it that's like a secret skill set that you don't yet have. I studied business and marketing and all of that at university, and I can comfortably assure you that there's nothing that I learned in that degree that you wouldn't be able to figure out for yourself. If
Not
you
the
just
first
sort
time
of
we've heard
get
that on the podcast, to be honest. We've heard that.
Yeah,
quite a
I'm
few
sure
times.
you've got a anti-establishment, university dropout sort of vibe going. But yeah, like, I mean, it's super not practical, but I think the perception is for technical founders that they don't have a marketing skill set. And there are obviously technical components to like how you navigate design and, like online ads, and there are a lot of like things you'll have to go out and figure out. But I think the first principles thinking that drives the important levers you can pull of like, who is this for? What do they want? Like scratch their itch. That's really marketing, like at its core. That is growth at its core, answering those questions well. And there's nothing preventing anyone from answering those questions well, other than like thinking about it carefully and going and doing the work and talking to the right people. So yeah, it's that there's no secret that you don't have. And yeah, you can go figure it out. But I guess the more tactical thing, which is kind of implied by a lot of what you've asked me even, is that growth is not is not a separate exercise to product. And it's not this like step 2 in business building. It's really like answering those questions that I mentioned just now is as much about what product you end up building as it is about how you then take that product to the world. And I really think those things early on especially have to be really closely married.
That's talking to my heart here, Geoff. Damn. So then I have to slowly wrap up and ask you, if you had to ask the community for what you need, what can the community, the people that are listening to this, how can they help Geoff?
Yeah, I mean, I think more and more to the vitamin discussion we were talking about earlier, I'm seeing that we can easily sell to people who are already keen to do recognition really well in their team, especially if there's some of it already happening. So if you are someone at a company where those sort of criteria are being satisfied, then just reach out to me. And if you know someone else, you hear of people looking to do something cool with building a real vibe around people's work being seen and appreciated, then you know where to come. And yeah, that's the main thing.
Awesome. So where can people find you? What's the email address or the LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean, Geoff@zuzocard.com. You can reach out to me directly, or Geoffrey Forbes on LinkedIn. You can also find me on LinkedIn by looking for completely professionally irrelevant posts about random adventures or LinkedIn games comments, as Rainier knows all too well. You'll stumble upon me eventually.
Cool.
I love seeing Geoff's comments on those games, those LinkedIn games, which doesn't make sense. Still trying to figure out why LinkedIn added it in. But some of those games can be a bit addictive. But then once you complete it, you can make a comment on your score. And Geoff just makes comments every day, but then rumor has it he alters his score somewhat because you can simply just edit your score and type whatever.
No way,
And
really.
then and then other people playing the game gets quite offended when
Well,
I see you've
half
got
of
like
them
impossible
know and they play along, and half of
Yes.
them like rage quit, and then it's the ensuing like comment wars that are just really special.
Great for fruitless engagement on LinkedIn.
I mean, you joke, but I've actually had like a lot of profile views from that have resulted in some sort of meaningful conversation. Maybe not like a
That's
sale,
true
so to say, but
because the comment actually gets a lot of impressions, it shows it to a
yeah,
lot of people, and then
yeah,
people see it and they say, "Oh, look at Geoff being funny, look at Geoff being a
yeah,
human." And
yeah,
then what does this human do? Oh, that's something I might be interested in. So it is actually a growth
A
tactic.
growth hack. Yeah.
yeah. Genuinely, I mean, I think that's another piece of maybe not advice, but like part of my personal sort of philosophy about doing things is just you should really like be enjoying it when you're trying
Yeah,
to
exactly.
take something out into the
Super
world.
important.
And I think it's just better for everyone if you do enjoy it, because
Yeah.
your customers will be having a better time, you'll be having a better time, and that's like
Because then it's human, right? And we all buy from
yeah,
humans, and we love engaging humans.
yeah, 100%.
And on that note, in the age of AI, we'll call it. Geoff, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your stories and your hardships and the growth story, like journey that you're on. And again, if you guys want to reach out to Geoff, you know where to find him. And Rainier, as always, thanks very much for joining. We'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, thanks. It was lekker.
Awesome, man. Yeah, good times. Thank you, guys.
Cool, man.